It is one of the most watched House races in the country.
25 of the 27 toss-ups are currently Republican seats.
Both call Eastern Iowa home, and both are asking for your vote.
I want them to know that this is personal.
I just wanted to serve my country and give back.
Tonight, they go head-to-head for the final time. CBS 2, Fox 28, and News Talk 1540 KXEL bring you the first Congressional District debate.
And we want to welcome you inside our studio here at Broadcast Park in Cedar Rapids for the final debate for Iowa's first Congressional District. I'm CBS 2 and Fox 28 News political reporter Nick Weig. On my right, News Talk 1540 KXEL program director Jeff Stein. We are the moderators for tonight's debate, featuring the Republican and Democratic candidates for U.S. House District 1, Congressman Rod Blum and State Representative Abby Finkenauer. In a moment, I will explain the rules of tonight's debate. But first, let's meet the candidates. And by the flip of a coin, Representative Finkenauer, you will go first. You have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here tonight with Congressman Blum and the moderators here. Thank you for putting this on. Again, I'm State Representative Abby Finkenauer, and I'm running for Congress here in this district because this is personal. I grew up a daughter of a union pipe fitter welder. My mom actually just retired from the Dubuque Community School District as a secretary back in February. You know, there were 4 kids in my family, and we were all first-generation college graduates. Still paying off student loans, so not always easy. But at the end of the day, I grew up in a state and in a country where if you worked hard, you could make it. Again, that is what we were told, and that is what we were promised. And unfortunately, right now, that promise is being broken in Washington, D.C. It's about time we send some Iowa values to D.C. to stand up for working families like I did in that state house for the last 4 years, to bring some common sense, invest in infrastructure, trade programs, apprenticeships, and actually make sure that we take on healthcare and fix it in this country. Because at the end of the day, Iowa's my home, and this is our country. I'm going to do whatever I can to fight for it.
Thank you very much. Congressman Blum, you have 1 minute.
First of all, I'd like to thank KGAN for hosting this debate. I think debates are important. I think it's important that Iowans get to hear where each of us stand on actual policy versus sound bites from attack ads. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a husband. I've also been a high school basketball coach, been a columnist for the Telegraph Herald for 13 years, and I've been a job creator. I know what it's like to meet a payroll. I know what it's like to stay up at night wondering if you can meet that payroll. And I know what it's like to grow companies. There's one reason I ran, and it's not for the pay, and it's not to be on Fox News, and it certainly is not to be a career politician. The reason I ran is I felt the American dream, which I lived. My parents had 10th grade educations. I felt the American dream was slipping away from this country and its wonderful citizens. And I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to make sure that we restore the American dream, and that's available for all the citizens in this great country, for their children and their grandchildren.
Thank you very much. Now we want to quickly take a look at the rules which both candidates have agreed to. After a question is asked by myself or Mr. Stein, the candidate has 90 seconds to answer. Their opponent will then have 60 seconds to respond. The moderator can ask a follow-up to each candidate if they choose to. That candidate has 30 seconds additional to respond. Now, a candidate may ask for a brief response to respond if they're called out by their opponent, but we're urging them to keep their rebuttals brief, as it will cut into their total time and limit the ability to respond later in this debate. So with all of that in shape, I now turn it over to Jeff Stein of AM 1540 KXEL for the first question of the night.
Nick, thank you very much. Good evening, Congressman. Good evening, Representative. Because of the coin toss, the first question is yours, Representative Finkenauer, and it has to do with the economy. As a member of Congress in a capitalistic society, there are things you can and cannot do to help the overall economic climate of the country and of Americans. So as a member of Congress, what steps would you advocate that Congress could take that would ease the situation for people in this country?
Well, first of all, when we're talking about, especially when it comes to taxes, that tax reform package that Congressman Blum, you voted for, that added $1.9 trillion to the deficit, that gave 83% of it to the top 1%, isn't the way you do it. You know, the tax cuts for working families weren't permanent. The fact is, right now, any type of tax relief package we need to be looking at should be looking at leveling the playing field here, making sure that we're closing those corporate loopholes and that corporations are paying their fair share. We also have to raise wages here in this country as well, so that every single person, no matter where you live, if you're working 40 hours a week, you're able to make, not just make a living, but able to make a life. It's incredibly important here and something we just haven't seen. We also should be investing in trade schools and apprenticeship programs. And that includes looking at expanding even the Perkins Act, which was just reauthorized. I think it's great. It's something that Waterloo Community School Districts were able to utilize, but we should be expanding that where we get more trade schools and apprenticeship program training in our school districts.
Congressman, you have 60 seconds.
I don't know what country you've been living in, Abby, the last 3 years, but our economy is absolutely booming, if you haven't noticed, and it's due in large part to those tax cuts. They are working. The average family of 4 in my district is going to save $2,464 a year over the next 10 years. That's $25,000. We have, for the first time in our history, more job openings than we have people looking for jobs. We have 7.1 million job openings. It was just announced today. We haven't had that many job openings, I don't think, in the history of our country. Optimism is up, and the unemployment rates are down. And you say we want people to make more money? I couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons I ran. So the middle class, we can increase their wages. Now, you probably want to do that through government dependency. I want to do it through the miracle of the free market. And guess what? The pay raises in last quarter, April, May, June, were the largest in 10 years. And in fact, the annual pay raises in Iowa are 5.1%. So you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And the facts do not support your attack ad.
Let me ask
Would
a
I
rebuttal.
be able to respond?
Well, let me ask the rebuttal question, and I think you can probably encompass it in 30 seconds. You've used the phrase working families a couple of times tonight. Define what that is. You also mentioned corporations paying their fair share. Define that so we have some parameters, please.
Yeah, so first of all, let me be very clear here. When he's talking about folks getting pay raises, there was just a poll out the other day which supports what I'm hearing out there in the district, where folks are working their tails off right now and they're not seeing an increase in their take-home pay. Folks making $90,000 a year or less are not seeing an increase in their take-home pay, and that's happening all across our country right now. You've got folks who are, working 40 hours a week, working their tails off, sometimes multifamily homes, and not able to make it.
And let me ask you, Congressman, Representative Finkenauer in her remarks talked about the tax bill and talked about percentages. Address that. Is that the way things, first of all, do you agree with the numbers? And second, is that the way things should be apportioned?
The greatest percentage of tax relief did go to the middle class if you look at percentages. Here's another fact.
That's not true.
Here's another fact.
That is
I didn't
factually
interrupt.
not
I didn't
true.
interrupt you.
That's not
Let me
true.
finish, please. The bottom 50% in this country pay 3% of the federal income tax. The bottom 50% of wage earners. So it's hard, unless we want to take people off of the income tax rolls completely, to give tax relief to the bottom 50% when they're only paying 3% of the total federal income taxes. When we talk about workers and increased wages, their wages are going up. The largest increases in 10 years. That's a fact from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and from the Department of Labor. That's a fact. In fact, they're going up faster in Iowa than the rest of the country. They've gone up 5.1%.
Right, Nick?
Thank you very much. Congressman Blum, economic growth has accelerated during the Trump administration, but the Fed is now raising rates in order to try and stave off inflation. What steps does Congress need to take in the coming year to prevent an economic slowdown?
Well, I am concerned, as the president is, about the Federal Reserve increasing the interest rates too quickly. One of their jobs is to make sure that the value of our currency is not devalued, which means we need to try to keep inflation under control. I've seen very few reports of inflationary pressure in this economy so far. So I am concerned that they over-tighten and it hurts the recovery that we're currently in. I'm not a big fan of the Federal Reserve. In fact, I would like to audit the Federal Reserve. Their balance sheet during former President Obama's administration increased from $1 trillion to $4 trillion. That's a $3 trillion increase. Where did that money go? Senator Rand Paul wants to know where that money go. I want to know where that money goes. We need to audit the Fed. And there's a bill out there, and I wish it would get some attention and at least get a vote to audit the Fed. We need to know when they expand their balance sheet where that money's going. I like the fact that they're independent, but they also need to let us know, and they need to be transparent on what they're doing. But I'm concerned about the interest rates. We haven't seen inflationary pressures so far. So I don't think there's a need to continue tightening the crank of interest rates. However, one good thing about rising interest rates is it means the economy is going great, which it is. And secondly, our people, our senior citizens on fixed incomes will start to get more interest on their certificate of deposits. They save their entire life. They put their money in a CD. They expect a decent return on that money. So that's a good thing about interest rates going up.
And Representative Finkenauer, I'll let you respond to that, but I also wanted to ask you about congressional action. In Bob Woodward's new book, President Trump reportedly said he wanted to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans, but was talked out of it. Is that something, if Democrats take back the House, they could actually work with this president on in terms of economic reform?
Well, that's just another example of the president saying one thing and doing another, very similar to what we've seen from Congressman Blum in Congress. You say that you care about working families and making sure that they have more in their paycheck, but the reality is, again, you voted for a tax bill that added $1.9 trillion to our deficit, giving 83% of that to the top 1% in corporations. And let me tell you what's happening with that money right now. You've got corporations right now spending 50 times more on stock buybacks than they are on increasing wages. This is real. Congressman, I understand the economy might be doing well for you, but I'm out there talking to folks right now who are working multiple jobs just trying to have enough money to send kids to baseball or softball practice. These are my friends and family, and quite frankly, you've forgotten about them in D.C.
Congressman, you want to respond?
I know you have notes tonight, and I've never been in a debate where you can bring notes in, but you sound just like your attack ads do. This tax cut is not going to cost the federal government a penny, Abby. Let's go back.
Goodness.
Well, you're not entitled to your own facts. You might be entitled to your own
Neither are you,
opinion. Let's go
Congressman.
back to 1964, the Kennedy tax cuts. Revenues to the federal government doubled in the next 10 years. 1986 tax cuts with Reagan. Revenues to the federal government doubled in the next 10 years. And guess what? We have an all-time record amount of revenues we're bringing in right now. Taxes are not down. The taxes we're bringing the federal government are an all-time record. The problem is that we spend too much.
Thank you very much.
Representative Finkenauer, the topic now is agriculture and the Farm Bill. We have the Farm Bill that comes up for review every 4 to 5 years. There wasn't one passed, and so now we have interim measures. It is fair to say that whoever is in Washington in January will have a crack at this quadrennial bit of legislation. What needs to be in the Farm Bill to help Iowa agribusiness and all of us as a result?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing up the Farm Bill. It is something that I am really disappointed that we saw Congress leave and not get done. Look, that was always a piece of legislation that it didn't matter if you were Democrat or Republican, you could get together on and do something good for Iowa. It's what we saw Senator Harkin do. It's what we saw Senator Grassley do. And unfortunately, right now, with the politics that are being played with that in the House, led by folks like Congressman Blum and your buddies in that U.S. House right now, unfortunately, this is, again, it's something that they've just played politics with and haven't gotten anything done. I support right now the Senate version, which was something that they had to come together on. Everybody didn't get everything that they wanted, but they made sure that crop insurance is in there. They also make sure that we're looking out for our rural Iowa and rural economy, especially with mental health care as well. It's important. It's stuff, again, that we should be able to put our political differences aside and get something done for Iowa, especially right now with a trade war this administration started on Twitter, where you have so much instability right now, and our farmers need something they can count on. And unfortunately, they didn't do their job in Congress and left without getting that thing done. And it's time we go and actually put politics aside and do something.
Congressman, you voted on that Farm Bill that did not make it through a conference committee.
Voted for it.
Is that the bill that should be pushed forward when the next Congress meets in January?
I think the biggest difference, Jeff, between the Senate version and the House version of the Farm Bill, and it's not surprising that Abby would not support the House version of the Farm Bill because it requires work for food stamps. There's work requirements in there. And it says if you're between 19 years old and 59 years old, you're physically and mentally able to work, and you don't have a child under the age of 6 in your home, you should be working. Now, most people that I talk to in this district agree wholeheartedly with that. Working at least 20 hours a week, or in a trade school, one of our fantastic community colleges in this district, getting a job skill to prepare you for the job market. That passed the House, and that version, the work requirements did not make it in the Senate version, so it's in conference right now. And hopefully when we go back after the election in lame duck session, we will have a vote on the Farm Bill and pass it. If not, then it'll probably be extended to the current Farm Bill for a year, but the House version has crop insurance in it as well. Now you want to talk about Twitter trade war, Abby. You say you're for the working man. NAFTA cost this country over 1 million jobs and over 400,000 good-paying jobs in manufacturing. Ross Perot, when he was running for president, said, "You'll hear the giant sucking sound of Mexico taking our jobs from us." It happened. I'm glad the president reopened and renegotiated NAFTA so that our working men and women in this country can get a fair shake and their wages aren't being driven down by cheap labor in Mexico.
Let me ask you, Representative Finkenauer, a follow-up. The difference between the House and Senate bills, as noted, had to do with so-called welfare to work. Talk about whether there's a form of that you would find acceptable, whether in the Farm Bill or in separate legislation.
Well, right now there already are work requirements. Let's be very clear here. And I actually went and spoke or talked to the Northeast Iowa Food Bank, which I believe Congressman Blum did the other day as well. And there are folks who are stepping up, actually filling the gap between what SNAP does cover and what it doesn't. And they're very concerned about the version that Congressman Blum was pushing for. I know, Congressman, you were just there the other day, and in fact, you had the gall while you were sitting there handing out milk to folks to talk about the fact that we have the best economy we've had in the last 63 years. That is so out of touch about this district and what it needs. We need to, again, stop playing politics with things that just sound good, that you want to run a campaign on and actually do something. This is another version of you going to Washington saying you're going to do one thing and then not doing it and coming back here and hoping folks just don't notice. We deserve better than that.
And Nick, the next topic actually dovetails from some of this.
A little bit, actually. We're going to talk about...
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Or no?
Let's move on simply because I think it'll encompass it all.
I want to get into the trade war here a little bit. In a recent interview, President Trump said that China wants to reach a trade deal, but he's canceled a couple of meetings with them. And he says, quote, "I say that they're not ready." Now, what kind of message does that send to farmers who are looking for progress right now?
It says their president is one heck of a good negotiator. China is coming to the president and this administration wanting to do a trade deal. The president said he's not ready yet because he wants to get a better trade deal. Our average ag tariff with China is they charge us 15% on our ag products. We charge 5%. India charges 40% tariff on ag products. We charge 5%. The president's right. We have been used as a piggy bank by the rest of the world for a lot of years. And so I am glad that he reopened NAFTA, both Mexico and Canada, and we've come to an agreement on that because we lost over 1 million jobs, most of them in manufacturing, that were good paying jobs. China wants to negotiate now, come to the table. That's a good sign. And the president wants to get more. Now, that's not a bad thing for this country when your president wants to get more. I think it sends a great message to all of us in this country to say, he's going to wait. He's going to get a better deal. He does know how to negotiate. He's from the private sector. And if he can do something well, it's negotiate well. So next year at this time, we won't be talking about China. I'm absolutely convinced of it. But and most of the farmers I talk to, they know it's a little short-term pain, but they're looking for the long-term gain. They're looking for the next 10 to 20 years of prosperity because this president negotiated a good trade deal with China.
Representative Finkenauer, if that deal is not reached come January, what specific steps does Congress need to do to step in and have a role in this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, this is another reason why this race is personal. I mean, my sister and brother-in-law are corn and soybean farmers. They're like folks all over the Midwest right now who are worried every single day about their livelihoods because of a trade war this administration decided to start on Twitter. Look, there is no doubt right now that this administration took working families, took folks, our farmers here, and used them as poker chips that they were willing to bet and lose on a trade war. There is no question that China is a bad actor. but there has been no strategy. And I do think it's something that we have to get together, talk to our corn growers, talk to our soybean farmers, and make sure that they know that we have their backs here. You know, right now you've got Brazil and China making new contracts with those soybeans, and these are contracts that U.S. farmers have made for decades and have worked for decades, and they're seeing go away. I mean, this is, again, not how this is supposed to work, and we deserve better.
Thank you very much.
All right, for this round, we are going to be speaking about health care and related issues, which include Medicare and Social Security. So the question to you, Representative Finkenauer, in 90 seconds. If you were to address, and I'm going to focus on the Affordable Care Act, if, as a member of Congress, what steps would you take to modify, amend, change what is currently on the books?
Yeah, thank you. Look, this is something we've got to fix. I was out there within the first couple of months of my campaign, and I met a woman who had oxygen, and she came up to me and she said that if that bill that Congressman Blum voted for, HCA, would become law, pass the Senate, be signed by the president, that her doctor told her that she wasn't going to be able to afford her oxygen all 24 hours, and she was going to have to pick whether she breathed at night or during the day. And she looked at me and she said, "You don't pick when you breathe, why should I have to?" I went, well, we've got to do something here. We've got to stop playing politics with healthcare and get serious about fixing this in our country. And so what we've got to do is add a public option to the ACA, something that quite frankly should have been done to begin with when crafting the ACA, so that it's allowing folks up to the age of 65 to buy into Medicare, essentially lowering those premiums, adding competition into the marketplace so you can keep your own insurance and drive down those premiums. You know, we've got folks, Democrats, Republicans, no party, it doesn't matter where you live in this country right now, you're struggling with your health care coverage, and we've got to get serious, stop playing politics. And what we don't do is vote for a bill that's going to repeal something, not replace it with anything, and at the same time allow insurance companies to charge more for folks with pre-existing conditions and older Americans. It's not how this, again, is supposed to work, and we've got to fix it and get serious here.
Congressman, 60 seconds with regard to the current law and what, if you were returned to Washington, you would advocate doing with regard to Affordable Care Act or a replacement.
Abby, attacking me with more canned lines from your ads on TV attacking me is not policy. I haven't heard policy yet saying this shouldn't be political. Bulletin, this is political. Washington, D.C. is very political. Very political. So I haven't heard policies from you. I'll gladly yield my time to listen to your healthcare actual policies. But what we need to do, let's just keep this simple. At the 60,000 foot level, Jeff, we need to help people who need help financially. Government is good at taxing and sending out checks. And let's do that. People on Social Security, Medicare, our veterans, particularly our special needs folks out there, and our veterans. We made promises to these people, and we need to keep them, and we need to help them. On the other end of the equation, when it comes to healthcare, let's unleash the miracle of the private sector, of the free market. This is an over-regulated marketplace. And the key here isn't cost shifting. The key is to bring down the cost of healthcare. And you don't do that by having your neighbor pay your health insurance. We need to actually decrease the cost of healthcare through the private market.
In 30 seconds, Representative Finkenauer, let's talk specifically about how we keep Medicare, Social Security solvent going forward.
Yes, well, what we don't do, again, is say we care about Medicare and Social Security and add $1.9 trillion to the deficit. In fact, today you just heard Mitch McConnell say that he's worried about the deficit, so they're going to have to look at entitlements. And let's be very clear that by entitlements, he means Social Security and Medicare, which are a promise we made to each other, and it's a promise that we better be able to keep. And so we've got to get serious here as well. What we should do is tax the Social Security income over $1 million. At the same time, when we're talking about Medicare, we should be allowing drug companies to negotiate directly with Medicare, lower those drug prices.
Congressman, 30 seconds specifically on Medicare and Social Security, please.
There you go again. This is not going to cost the federal government a cent. But I guess if you repeat a lie often enough, some people will believe it. We need to have a bipartisan solution when it comes to Medicare and Social Security. Medicare is going to go broke in 8 years. Social Security is going to go broke in 16 years. So it needs to be a bipartisan solution. I've always said Republicans don't have a corner on great ideas, and neither do Democrats. A couple of the Democrat ideas that to help protect these two programs that I like is lifting the cap on income that you pay into Social Security, and also perhaps means testing Social Security. We should look at those ideas as well as some of our ideas.
Nick?
We're going to kind of delve into the healthcare a little bit more here, and then we're going to take a quick break. On the issue of opiates, Congressman, there's been some legislative efforts on this growing problem, but the epidemic is taking more lives every day, both here in Iowa and across the country. How can Congress not only tackle this issue from a legislative standpoint, but hold those responsible for this accountable?
Yes, we have, when you say some legislative action has been taken, we passed over 60 bills in the House this year, on this session, to do with opioids. Everyone, I think, now in the medical community recognizes how powerful these drugs are, and they also recognize that people can be addicted to them in as little as 5 days. I've even heard sometimes 3 days. So we need to look at, I spent 6 hours with emergency room physicians at Allen Hospital in Waterloo. And it is very evident when I was in there with them, we need to look at making sure we don't overprescribe opioids to people who have pain. Because some folks came in that 6 hours as an emergency room and they wanted pain pills, and they weren't in pain. So they were shopping emergency rooms for opioids. Secondly, we need to do a better job of prescribing things that are not addictive to control pain. Nobody wants their patients in pain. We all understand that. We'd all agree with that. So there are alternative methods to deal with pain that are not so addicting as an opioid is. So we need to look at that, but we passed over 60 bills in the House this year to help fund the dissemination of information amongst the healthcare community, and also to research and help give access to those types of things that are not as addicting as an opioid is.
And Representative Finkenauer, same question. What does Congress need to do moving forward to address this issue?
Well, I think this is one of these issues where I really believe that Democrats and Republicans can get together on and get something done. We saw that on the state house level. There's always more to do. I know Congress has attempted to do something here. I know, the president threw about $6 million towards it. It needs more funding. We need to actually make sure that we're supporting our local agencies as well that are, fighting this fight on, the front lines here. At the same time, what we have to do as well is make sure that we release the grip that Big Pharma has over Washington, D.C. right now. I'll tell you, I've never taken a dime from Big Pharma. I never will. Congressman Blum, I don't think you can say the same. And in fact, Congressman Blum actually has investments in pharmaceutical companies. If you're looking at getting serious about this, we've got to take those influences out of it, care about the people here in this district, and find something that's going to work. And I really believe that's listening to our local folks who, again, have been on the front lines, give them what they need.
Congressman, would you care to respond to that? Do you take money from those groups?
This is one of the things the swamp does in politics when it's election year. They look at a person that has a stock portfolio and they start picking on the stocks that you own. So if you own ExxonMobil, well, then you're against renewable fuels. If you own a pharmaceutical company, which might be a good investment, well, then you're in the hip pocket of pharmaceutical. Abby, I don't vote a certain direction no matter how much money a company gives me. Never have and never will. At 63 years old, I didn't go to Washington to be for sale. And I agree, and I do agree with you, though, that Big Pharma, we need to look at Big Pharma. I'm one that supports a Democrat idea, which is having Medicare and Medicaid negotiate the prices for pharmaceuticals, and also the reimportation of drugs across country lines.
Thank you very much. All right, well, with that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of the final 1st Congressional District debate in just 60 seconds, so don't go away. and we want to welcome you back to Broadcast Park here in Cedar Rapids for the second half of the final debate in Iowa's 1st Congressional District. And with that, I'm going to turn it again over to KXEL's Jeff Stein for the next question.
Thank you, Nick. And again, thanks to both of you for participating in this. Prior to the event, we invited questions from viewers of CBS 2 and Fox 28 and listeners to News Talk 1540 KXEL, and we received a number of questions on the topic of immigration. So I will start with you, Representative Finkenauer, in 90 seconds. The policies that you would advocate going forward are what? And among the things that were mentioned specifically that you may want to address, the ICE agency, the wall, birthright citizenship, what should be the policy that you would carry forward in Washington?
Yeah, so when it comes to immigration, I gotta be honest, this is one of those things that I don't think Republicans or Democrats have gotten right. It's one of the issues that's very hot button that you've seen politics get played with multiple times, and it's about time we get really serious here, and that's passing a comprehensive immigration reform package. There's a couple things in there that we have to do. We've got to secure our border. We also have to make sure that we have an earned pathway to citizenship for folks, pulling them out of the shadows and making sure that our communities are safer. We also have to have a pathway for our dreamers. Again, something Democrats, Republicans should be able to get together on. And I also support making E-Verify mandatory and making sure that that is funded in a way that our businesses have what they need to be able to use it, and again, that it's effective. So, again, it's something we should be able to get together on. I saw it happen in 2014. The Senate passed a bipartisan immigration reform package, but it never got through the House. So this is one where we really do have to put politics aside, get serious. It's better, it's good for our country and good for Iowa when we do.
Congressman Blum, in 60 seconds, the same question. If you are returned to Congress, what do you advocate with regard to the broad topic, admittedly broad topic of immigration?
Yeah, in 60 seconds, I'm going to solve the entire deal right here.
That's it. That's the question.
First of all, I'd like to say I have empathy for people who make that trek through Mexico or from Central America and sometimes swim across the Rio Grande or sneak across our border at night in the hope to make them and their family's future better, that want to work. I have empathy for that. But I'm also old-fashioned, and I believe law is the law. And if you don't like the law, you change the law, you don't ignore it. So we need to secure our border. In most places, that's a wall. And we need to secure our border with technology and with the wall. And then so we've been promised that twice. We were promised that under Ronald Reagan, and it didn't happen. We gave amnesty with no wall. And under President Bush, we were promised to secure the border, and it didn't happen. So the Americans I speak to, for the most part, say, twice the federal government hasn't kept their word. We need to secure the border before we do anything else. But the DACA kids, we need to give them legal status so they know they're not going to be deported. I agree that we need to make E-Verify mandatory, but also update the system so employers can rely on it so it's reliable.
Representative Finkenauer, in your original response, you talked about securing the border. Tell me how in 30 seconds.
I truly believe we've got to use smart technology here. We've got to, use what we have and make sure that our resources that we do have are being put to good use. And that would be using smart technology. It also creates jobs, lasting jobs for years to come as well. And again, we've got to take this seriously. This should be a part of a whole comprehensive strategy and comprehensive package that I really believe that Democrats and Republicans, it's about time we get together and get something done.
Congressman, let me ask you in 30 seconds. We've heard talk of comprehensive packages. There are also some who say, well, let's take it a piece at a time. I'm not sure if you were alluding to that with building a wall or not. So tell me in 30 seconds, do you believe comprehensive, or are you willing to do something and then something else later?
I voted for the first Goodlatte bill, which was comprehensive immigration reform. Sometimes I think because of the lack of partisanship in Washington, D.C., it's smaller, as they say, to eat the elephant in small bites, one bite at a time, to take, same thing with health care. Sometimes it's easier to get agreement on one item. So if we have to get agreement on building the wall or securing the border, that money needs to be put in a trust fund so it cannot be taken away so that we finally build the border. My opponent, build the wall. My opponent always says, too much hyper-partisanship in Washington, D.C. We just need to get together on politics. I couldn't agree more. Have you ever heard of the resistance movement? I'm sure she has. And that is not exactly conducive to getting together. Because I've been on a lot of committees and a lot of hearings where the resistance is alive and well by the Democrat Party in Washington.
All right, thank you both, Nick.
Can I have a response?
Let's move on to the topic, and you could fold it into a closing.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, we'll get going here, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time because there's going to be a little bit of math involved in this. Congressman, when you attended Loras College, the average student in this country spent $2,200 on tuition, room, and board. Today, that cost is up 813%, but the minimum wage is only up about 200%. So how can a student who's not only going to school but working full-time afford college if they're burdened with debt that prevents them from living that American dream you speak of once they get that degree?
The UNI is a regent school in my district, and I'm very proud of the University of Northern Iowa. They do a great job in counseling their students on debt. And I think the average, don't quote me on the stat perfectly, but I think the average student leaves UNI with between $25,000 and $30,000 in debt. That's of the students that have debt, that statistic. So if you don't have any debt, that's not even included in that figure. There are a lot of ways students today can keep down the cost of education. One way is to go to one of our amazing community colleges, and almost all the credits at a community college transfer to a four-year school. They do a great job of working with our regent schools, the community colleges do. Secondly, part-time jobs. I had a part-time job all the way through college. Students can have part-time jobs. University of Northern Iowa does a great job with that as well, offering a lot of employment opportunities for their students. Thirdly, graduate in 4 years. Not 5 years, not 6 years, graduate in 4 years. Obviously, the cost of college has gone up. I look at the cost of a new car being $30,000. If I graduate with a 4-year college degree, which is going to dramatically increase my earnings potential going forward, and it's the cost of a new car, I guess each person has to decide this for their own, but I think that's a reasonably good deal.
Representative Finkenauer, you've talked about your own student debts, which you're still paying off. And many students turn to Pell Grants, which is a federal program. When those are taken into account, federal funding sometimes accounts for more funding to state schools than the states themselves. So does Congress need to tackle this issue, or is this something that Congress needs to return back to the states to deal with on a state-by-state basis?
Well, right now, both state and federal need to step up when it comes to college student loan debt. This is something that is, again, personal to me, and it's personal to folks all over this district. You know, I'm a first-generation college graduate like many of my friends were. My parents worked really hard, helped get me to college, but weren't able to pay for it all. And so I have friends right now that, you know, I went to high school with that went to school in Iowa. Some of them had to move away for jobs that paid well enough to help them pay off their debt. And right now they're 29, 30. They want to be able to move back home to Iowa, and they can't find the jobs to help pay off their debt while they're doing it. It's really tough right now. And so what we've got to do is get serious and allow students to be able to refinance their loans as you can a mortgage. I mean, the fact that this hasn't gotten done just shows you who Washington's looking out for, or how out of touch they are, maybe. You know, it's one of those things where, again, we're sitting around a table in D.C., there's not a lot of folks paying off student loans. So it's about time we get serious and also make sure the states get serious about it as well.
Thank you very much.
I guess I probably can't, huh? Just respond to that.
You know what?
It's all right.
We'll move on, because I have a hunch this one might take up a little bit of our time.
Sorry.
This is the 9th round for those who are keeping score. And again, among the questions that came in to us at News Talk 1540 KXEL, as well as CBS 2 and Fox 28, it had to do with the topic of abortion. And the first question goes to you, Representative Finkenauer, in 90 seconds. It's been 45 years since Roe versus Wade was decided that established a viability standard. And as medical technology has changed, the viability standard has moved. We heard now Justice Kavanaugh say Roe versus Wade was settled law. So as you're asked the broad question of what will you as a member of Congress do with regard to the topic of abortion, funding, late term, etc., your response to voters is what?
Look, I too stand by Roe v. Wade, and we have to make sure that is upheld. When it comes to women's health issues, it's the same thing in the State House as we're going to see in Congress as well, that you better make sure those decisions are between a woman and her doctor. I'll tell you, I heard some heartbreaking stories from women who were coming under attack in the state of Iowa, who were especially faced with some of the hardest decisions of their life when they found out their very wanted baby wouldn't just survive gestation. And they were watching their government put themselves in their doctor's offices making those decisions for them. And again, that's not how this is supposed to work. I trust doctors, I trust women, and these decisions should be made between the two of them. I truly believe that that is something that is a respect issue. I respect everybody's beliefs on the issue as well. It's a touchy subject for a lot of folks. That means a lot. I get it. Where I'm at with it and where I stand is that this should be between a woman and her doctor, and you should have respect for those decisions and uphold Roe v. Wade.
Congressman, 60 seconds. Same question on the broad topic of abortion, please.
When you're saying between a woman and the doctor, there's another person involved in this. If there's a beating heart inside that woman, it's a woman and a doctor and yet another human being. This will be real simple. I'm pro-life, and I have a 100% pro-life voting record in Congress. My wife is pro-life. And I look even to the Constitution. It talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They listed life first for a reason, because without life, you can't have liberty. And without life and liberty, you can't pursue happiness. When we talk about Planned Parenthood, I voted to defund Planned Parenthood. They get about $500 million a year of taxpayer money. They don't need that from the taxpayers. We have unbelievably awesome community health centers in the 1st District of Iowa, and I visited all of them, I believe now, at least once. And we have 20 to 1. There's 20 times more community health centers across this country than there are Planned Parenthood clinics. So I'm all for women's health, and if they can't afford it, I'm for them getting it for free. But let's do it at a community health center where they do not perform abortions.
Representative, in 30 seconds, you support Roe versus Wade, which has the viability point. Talk about what has been called late term, because statistics show that something like 50% of those babies survive at 24 to 25 weeks. So does government have a role in some limitation, or do you support any limitations?
Look, when it comes to these decisions, it should be between a woman and her doctor. This is something, again, I had to deal with on the state level, where, you know, I was receiving all these letters from women who were hearing, again, the most horrible news they've ever could imagine when they're going to their doctor and finding out that their baby would not survive gestation. The way that the state has taken this is extreme. You know, it's one of those things where just this last year, you know, there was a Republican lawmaker from Dubuque County, Shannon Lundgren, who literally said that if your baby dies in the womb, then you have to carry it to gestation. I mean, that's not what the bill did, but that is what she said and was okay with that. And again, this is one of those things that you are so out of touch with the district if you don't believe that these decisions belong between a woman and her doctor.
Representative,
can I reply to that?
But yeah, and I want to direct it, and please do, but in the time that we have, the 30 seconds per the rules, do you support any exceptions to abortion, and if so, explain to me what those are and under what circumstances and why?
I just want to point out that my opponent, she's okay. She will vote for abortion in the 9th month, and also, in most countries in the world, after 24 to 26 weeks, as you mentioned, do not allow abortions. And secondly, she voted against a bill in Iowa that would prohibit the selling of fetal body parts. Would you repeat your question, please?
Talk to me about the exceptions.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm not, you know, if it's rape or incest, certainly that's a horrible thing to have happen to a person, but I don't think two wrongs make a right. And I have talked also to a lot of women who were the victims of a rape or incest, and the greatest thing that came from that is the child that they love, and they cannot imagine that child not being part of their life. And if they don't want the child, there's lots of adoption agencies today that would gladly put that child up for adoption.
All right, thank you both.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Look, what Congressman Blum just talked about, there is already federal law prohibiting sale. This is, again, just politics being played in Iowa. When that bill was drafted in the Iowa House, it was one of the most poorly pieces of crafted legislation I have seen. They were purely playing politics. In fact, I voted for an amendment upholding federal law on the issue. I support federal law on the issue. But Congressman, again, it was so poorly crafted that it was putting life-saving research at the University of Iowa on the line here. And that's not, again, what we should be doing with our politics. Again, I support the federal law on it, and it was one of the worst pieces of legislation I have seen.
All right, thank you both.
All right, I want to move on to a topic that doesn't get a lot of play lately with the economy and everything ahead of it, and that's the war on terror. Congressman, more than 17 years ago, Congress authorized then President Bush on the use of force against those who attacked us on 9/11. Every president since then has used that as justification for attacks somewhere. Is it time for Congress to revisit this authorization? And if so, where would you come down on authorizing President Trump or any president after him to use force moving forward?
Yeah, what you're referring to is the AUMF, authorization for use of military force, and it has been abused by most presidents, regardless of Democrat or Republican stripes. With the last, I believe, legal war, and I mean constitutionally legal war, we have is World War II. And I believe if we're going to use a military force, other than if the threat is imminent, okay, that we don't need to meet in Congress to vote for that if it's that we have imminent danger. But that aside, yes, when we get militarily involved in these foreign countries, that needs to come before Congress. And we need to have a vote on that, and we need to debate that. My daughter is 19 years old. Since Sophie has been born, all she has known is war. We have been in the Middle East in war since she's been born. What are we still doing in Afghanistan? And I am one that says, we need to get out of Afghanistan. We need to stop abusing the AUMF, and we need to take a look. It's easy to get into wars, but I would always be asking if we could actually debate them and vote on them. What is the exit strategy, A, and B, how do you define victory? Because we never seem to be able to extract ourselves. I don't believe in nation building. We shouldn't be around the world sacrificing our young men and women to nation build, to install democracy in other countries that don't want democracy. So it's been abused, and I think all these wars we get into should go to a vote of Congress.
Representative Finkenauer, do you agree? And do you think it's time for the U.S. to leave Afghanistan after 17 years?
Look, when it comes to military action anywhere, we should make sure that our troops are not in harm's way 1 minute longer than they have to be. Anything that we decide to do should be thought out. There should be strategy, and we should have a plan. And unfortunately, I think this is something where, again, the U.S. needs to step up and be better about that and make sure we have plans moving forward as well. I do think this is something that Congress needs to have a say in and make sure that we have all the facts that we can possibly have and make the best possible decision for our troops and for our country.
And Congressman Blum, you said it's time for us to leave Afghanistan. Is there anywhere in the world right now that you feel represents enough of a threat to the United States that military force should be considered by both Congress and the President?
No, there's not currently anywhere in the world where I think we should be using military force. That's different than military presence. There's countries where I think it's okay to maintain a military presence, as we have done in other places after World War II. But as far as military force, no. I was on the Budget Committee for 2 years, and we debated for a long time what's called OCO, Overseas Contingency Operations. The billions and billions of dollars these wars cost us, guess what? They're off budget. I said, what is off budget when I first went to Washington, D.C.? It sounds like a second set of books. So these things aren't even in the budget. And we end up spending trillions of dollars on the other side of the world and sacrifice our young men and women's lives.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk now about politics. You've each said we need to not talk about politics. We should be more bipartisan, and I'm going to have the audacity to ask you a very political question, but it ties to the leadership in the chamber. And I'll start with you, Representative Finkenauer. The first vote that any member of Congress takes at the beginning of a new session is for the leader of their party. If the Democrats take the majority in the House, you'll be voting for the Speaker. Will you be voting for Nancy Pelosi, and if not, who?
No one has my vote until I sit down and talk to whoever wants the job and have a very long conversation about this district and about Iowa, and making sure that we have somebody who's going to fight for more infrastructure funding, who's going to make sure that we invest in trade schools and apprenticeship programs, and who's going to get serious about fixing healthcare. These are conversations I have not been able to have. Looking forward to having them, and then I'll make my decisions.
Congressman Blum, a very similar question. You'll be voting, if you are returned to Congress, for a party leader, perhaps the Speaker if your party has the majority. Are you voting for Representative McCarthy, Representative Jordan? Who?
This is interesting. My opponent has taken not answering a question to a new level. I mean, it's almost become an art form here tonight. She doesn't want to say she's going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, but she was Nancy Pelosi's handpicked candidate. Nancy Pelosi has introduced her to Hollywood and New York City on the East Coast to raise funds. And we've been outraised probably 5-1 because of the East Coast and West Coast because of Pelosi's connections. And in politics, they expect a return for that favor. She's just not doing that to be nice. So you would have a tremendous amount of pressure on you to not vote for Nancy Pelosi. I've already walked the walk in addition to talk the talk. My first vote was against sitting Speaker, Republican Speaker, John Boehner. And that cost me politically. And people said I would never be back in Washington, D.C. I'd never have access to the establishment PAC fundraising. And that's fine with me, because I could put my head on the pillow at the end of the night, because I promised change to this district when I went to Washington, D.C. I'm independent. I stand up to my own party when they need to be stood up to, starting with my very first vote in Congress.
Let me follow up with you, Representative Finkenauer. Depending on who tosses their hat in the ring, last time there were multiple people, what do you need to hear from them? You said you wanted to talk to them, but what do you need to hear that gives you the confidence in putting your vote for them to lead your party in the chamber?
So I think there's a couple of things here. It's not just what I need to hear from them, it's what they need to hear from me, and making sure that they are hearing from Iowans. You know, the Midwest is not like our coast. We've got to make sure that we invest in infrastructure, that we fix our healthcare, that we invest in trade programs and apprenticeships. This, again, are the conversations that we need to have, and I need to make sure that they have the Midwest back. Again, that's something I haven't seen, and that's something that I want to make sure those conversations are had, because quite frankly, Iowans have been forgotten in D.C. for far too long.
Congressman, McCarthy or Jordan or someone else?
First of all, we have to keep the majority of the House.
But you'll still have
be a
a party
non-issue.
leader.
We do keep the majority. Kevin McCarthy, who is currently the House leader, has said that he's running for it. Jim Jordan, who is the founder of the House Freedom Caucus, has already said he's running for it. And I have good relationships with both of those gentlemen, as well as the current Speaker, Paul Ryan. And I imagine, Jeff, there's going to be more than just those two running for Speaker. So I have to wait till I get there and see who I think can lead us. And we make things complicated in Washington. We just need to, I want somebody that's going to fight for what we told the American people we would do.
Thank you both.
Excuse me, it's been almost an hour. I believe we have time for one more round of questions here, and Congressman Blum, I'm going to start with you. You can't go anywhere in Iowa and not hear about the lack of civility in Washington. You referenced the swamp, you referenced the inability to get anything done. So how does that change? You've been there for 4 years. What do you say to Iowans to say, I can fix this if you give me 2 more years?
Yes, I've noticed an unbelievable lack of civility in the last 2 years. I have noticed that things have become hyper partisan. It seems like everything is political these days. I have received death threats to the point where I have to have police protection when I have a public event. My wife has received messages that say, we know where you live. My 19-year-old daughter has received messages that say, we hope you get cancer and die, or we hope you have a pregnancy and can't have an abortion. That's how vile it has got. That's how low the level of discourse has got in this country. I can't control it. I think it starts with our political leaders. When we have Maxine Waters saying a member of the Trump cabinet, wherever they go in public, you need to get in their face, and we shouldn't let them have peace wherever they go. Senator Ted Cruz and his wife were chased out of a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and we're seeing it every day, this mob mentality across this country when it comes to politicians. I think serving the public and running for office is still a noble pursuit, and I don't think anybody signs up to have their family threatened. And I still believe in Iowa nice. And I think 99% of the people in this state are unbelievably kind, they're nice, they're sincere, and they're respectful, even when you disagree. All I can do is I can be respectful, I can be professional, I can listen to people who disagree with me, and I only hope in return they would listen to me.
Representative Finkenauer, you have spent some time in the Iowa State House for the last 2 years. Republicans were in complete control. and it wasn't always a civil place between the two parties. So taking that into account, if you're elected, you're one member of 435 that's supposed to change the environment, and every newcomer says that they're going to bring back bipartisanship. What specific steps can you take to actually accomplish that in an entirely new place like Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so part of this is doing some of the stuff we did in the State House, which was taking the voices of folks from Dubuque down to Des Moines and making sure that their stories are told. I think that's where things get really bogged down in Washington, D.C. You've got folks coming and, saying they're throwing this number here or that number there, but they're not putting real people to those numbers. And so when you're able to take your constituents' concerns and their voices, go work across the aisle and say, this is a woman that I met again who has oxygen and is concerned that she's not going to be able to breathe for all 24 hours. I mean, these are real people, and to be able to do that, I really believe, is how we start making a difference here. It's what we tried to do in that State House as well, and when we put people back in politics and government, I think we get to fix things. And I really believe that there is a referendum right now in our country where they want Democrats, Republicans, everybody to listen to the people in their districts, represent the folks in their districts, and go make sure they have a voice. It's why I decided to do this.
Thank you very much.
We've completed the questioning. It is now time for each candidate to deliver a closing statement, 60 seconds in length. And Representative Finkenauer, you go first.
Well, thank you again, and thank you, Congressman Blum. Again, I decided to do this because it was personal, but this race is personal to folks all across this district, from the woman I talked about with the oxygen to another gentleman I met when I was knocking doors who was worried about his cancer medication, which cost him $10K a month, to the guy that I went to grade school with who's a union iron worker who's working his tail off right now and was worried about that tax plan because he wasn't seeing an increase in wages, but the folks at the top were getting Ferraris. These are real concerns that we've got to go to Washington, D.C. and make sure we fix. Congressman Blum, I know you go there, you say one thing, you do another. You say you wanted to fix the deficit, but at the same time you voted to add $1.9 trillion to it. You say you cared about health care, but you voted for a bill that costs folks with pre-existing conditions more. You say you care about term limits, but at the same time you won't self-term limit yourself. I mean, these are real things that we've got to make sure that, you're going there, you're saying one thing, you're doing another, and quite frankly, folks in this district need to make sure they have somebody who will actually stand up for them every chance she gets.
All right, thank you. Congressman Blum, 60 seconds for your closing, sir.
It doesn't surprise me when you have your 60-second closing. You should be appealing to the voters on why they should vote for you. My opponent chose instead to spend her 60 seconds attacking me. And that's sad, that's partisan, and that's exactly what's wrong with politics today. As people go to the polls, I want them to think about my experience, my life experience, that I went to Washington, D.C. to reform Congress, and I went to Washington, D.C. to reignite this economy. Things are going well economically in this country now. Wages are up, optimism is up, unemployment is down, and we have more jobs than people looking for jobs for the first time in this country's history. And I also want them to think that I'm the guy that's independent in Washington, D.C. I'm the guy that voted against John Boehner. I'm the guy that votes against Republican omnibus bills. I'm the guy that votes against Republican NDA bills because of spying on our citizens. And that I'm the guy that's for term limits. I'm the guy that wants to eliminate the Congressional Pension Program. I'm the guy that wants to have a lifetime ban on lobbying. And I'm the guy that wants to clean up Congress as they go to vote. And I respectfully ask for the citizens of Northeast Iowa's vote on November 6th.
Thank you, Congressman.